And the commissioners, welcome. Teresa, you ready? Good evening. The Board of Commissioners is the governing body of Clatsop County, all county service districts, of which this body so acts, and as the Clatsop County Local Contract Review Board is now meeting in regular session. Would you please join me for the flag salute?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Nevertheless.
Here.
Commissioner Clement. Here. Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Sobel.
Here.
Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
I'll look for a motion to approve the amended agenda as presented.
So move. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the amended agenda. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Tonight we have a presentation. Really looking forward to hear from Amy Baker from Clatsop Behavioral Health Care. Come on up, Amy, and welcome. Good evening.
Good evening. I understand you all had a late working session last evening, so I appreciate your patience while I give you a presentation. Hopefully I won't be too long-winded. My name's Amy Baker. I'm the Executive Director with Clatsop Behavioral Health Care, and I am here, I think, for my third presentation since I've been in this position. Gosh, where to start? So I've been in this position for almost 11 months, and it has been eye-opening and enlightening. And I kind of want to give you some updates on changes that we're making, observations that I've had, and things that we want to continue to work on going forward. So I did this presentation for my staff about a month ago, and part of what became imminently clear to me probably two or 3 months ago, that really what has been driving Clatsop Behavioral Health Care, both from a clinical perspective and a financial perspective, is that we've been working really, really hard to make everybody happy. And that our primary motivator has been around how to address complaints and how to stop complaints from happening, but not necessarily do the right thing and the right service. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. I mean, obviously, we've provided a lot of free care. I think that there have been times when the expectation has been that for folks with behavioral health problems, we'll get them out of the community and quickly we'll fix things that will make problems go away. And I think that realistically, if we're going to have a good behavioral health approach in this community, we're going to have to do it together. The behavioral health system is complicated, as many of you know. It's complicated by funding, laws, people have civil rights. There is the issue of correctly figuring out what's going on with somebody so that we can send them in the right direction. Statewide, there's a limited bed capacity. And then, of course, all of the folks that we work with have cross-system involvement.
So, Amy, that differential, if I can just hold you up a little bit, differential diagnosis, does that mean that somebody gets diagnosed differently in different places, or?
That's a really good question. And so a lot of what we see, and this is particularly true with our crisis team, is that we will see folks who are significantly substance abusing, but it looks like mental health. So there are things like meth-induced psychosis. And yet the laws for mental health don't necessarily apply for those folks. There's a different pathway for them. And so our system and our team has to appropriately figure out what is going on with somebody so that we can send them in the right direction. And that's really, really important.
Okay.
So how do you make those calls?
Yeah, no kidding. That's a good question.
So basically, one of the things that we've done is really beefed up our oversight by our medical professionals. The reality is social workers and counselors are trained to diagnose, but the people who receive the most training in that our medical professionals, our psychiatrists, my medical director. Like right now, every crisis case that we see in the hospital ED gets staffed with my medical director because he's been doing it for, I don't know, 30 plus years. And when we can't figure it out, then we do a psychiatric assessment.
Because isn't it also true that I had read one time that over 50% of people that are going to harm themselves are using at the time of the incident?
It is absolutely true that substance abuse increases people's risk of self-harm. It's not necessarily because of the substance abuse, but it decreases inhibitions, basically. I mean, it clouds judgment. And so that is absolutely a risk factor. So one of the other pieces that I've discovered is that with CBH, our priority population really has actually been everyone. Like pretty much everyone who comes to us we've seen. And the challenge with that is that we are a community mental health program, and ultimately who we are responsible for are the most vulnerable population, the folks who are most at risk. Our front door is wide open. And of course, some of what that's meant for us is that we've been writing off a significant amount of money each month in providing free care.
Is some of that things being available to bill Medicare? Do you have the staff to handle that?
It's a really good question. So basically, there are two pieces to that. One is it requires having an LCSW. So LCSWs are the only non-medical staff who can get reimbursed by Medicare. And otherwise, it's just medical staff. And at this point, I'm still not getting reimbursed by Medicare for our medical staff, just because of the bureaucracy and roadblocks that are there to basically make our lives harder.
Do you know what would make it easier?
Wow, where to start with Medicare? So essentially with Medicare, so that one of the challenges is getting people credentialed. The other is the reality that they reimburse at about the third of the rate that Medicaid does. We will continue to see clients with Medicare only, but basically they're going to fit into a priority care population. So people who have major mental illness who have Medicare only, we're going to see those folks. I mean, there are people, we'll see them for medication management, we'll see them for case management, all of that.
Is that staff, though, that you're continuing to work on to try to have on board, or is it just the bureaucracy of it?
It is, again, so part of the issue is that we have a certain amount of funding, and we're only assisted in providing a certain amount of free care, and so we have to prioritize who the folks are that we're seeing for free care. Does that make sense? Sorry, this was from my all staff. So this is kind of where we've been, but I'm in a place now where I really want to put that hamster wheel up for sale, so if somebody else wants to buy it.
But you're our only option, right?
No. I'll get there, I promise.
Okay.
I promise. So obviously, in the case of CBH, doing the right thing is often doing the really hard thing. And that includes making sure that we're serving the right people and also that we're doing the right services. So priority population, high-risk individuals, individuals with severe mental illness, court-mandated individuals, pregnant moms, adults with children, individuals with serious addictions, people at greatest risk. Now, this isn't the only people that we're served, because our population is bigger than that. But these are the folks that we have to serve from a priority standpoint. And your question about CBH being the only option, it's not true. There is, for folks with private insurance, there are private counselors in town. There's, I don't know, probably 12 licensed individual counselors that I'm aware of.
LCSWs who are
Yeah, and LPCs.
LPC, okay.
Yes,
Licensed professional counselors, okay,
yes. And then there's also primary care.
okay.
And part of what we've done with our psychiatry program is that we're available for consult to any primary care physician. My psychiatrist will talk to any primary care physician at any point. Now we're still going to obviously provide medications for people who are complicated. That's our specialty. That's what we do. We are a specialty mental health service.
Are you in fact our intake unit for everybody? I mean, does everybody come to you?
No, there's lots of people who seek out services on their own that
Okay.
we don't ever have any contact with.
Okay. Okay.
And of course, the reality is your behavioral health system has as much capacity to do good as it does to do harm. And we have to be really careful about that. And some of the ways in which we do harm is reinforcing helplessness. I mean, there's a myth that people with mental health issues don't take personal accountability, and that's not true. We want people to be independent from the mental health system. We want people to have jobs and lives. And that when they're in crisis and when they need us, we need to be there at the right time. We need to assess the situation accurately. We need to do effective services. We need to coordinate with our partners. And one of the things that we need to not do is perpetuate addictions.
How are you afraid that you're perpetuating addiction?
Such a good question. So, I'm sure you are aware in this community that there is a opioid epidemic in terms of opioid prescribing. I would say that's also true for other medications that are controlled, such as stimulants and benzodiazepines. And CBH is actively initiating a policy where every client who is receiving a controlled substance has to sign an agreement for it. Controlled substances are really problematic because they can either create addiction or perpetuate addiction. I mean, essentially, stimulants can be very effective with adult attention deficit disorder, but it can also trigger relapse for methamphetamine. And so we have to be careful about that. And benzodiazepines are known to treat anxiety disorders, but they're also known to lose effect after about 5 weeks. And people develop tolerance, and they are known to have negative health consequences. So probably about half the complaints that I get right now are related to people not being happy about us either tapering or restricting prescriptions for controlled substances. But the reality is they are and can be very harmful to people. Yes?
So there's some controversy around this because it's like some folks would say that a needle exchange program perpetuates addictions. And of course, I don't agree with that. You know, I support needle exchange programs. But so you have folks in the community that, you know, go that route where say, oh, you're
Right.
just, you know, are you enabling addiction by a needle exchange program? And so I think I just wanted to bring that up partially to hear, you know, and another one I say, well, you give kids Ritalin when they're a kid, you're predisposing them to methamphetamine addiction as adults. And so I think it's nuanced, and I think it's important that I'm glad you put that up there because it's a controversial subject for some people.
Agreed. And I think when it comes to medication management, it's always a conversation about risk benefit.
Right.
There are some people in which it's a benefit, but you have to weigh it. Does the risk outweigh that? And for us as an organization, we're choosing to be much, much more conservative about that. And so you will hear complaints about CBHs pulling people off medications. I want you to understand that's where some of that conversation is coming from.
Yeah, I get that, and I appreciate, I wanted to delve into that because yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that.
So the fun part of my job is actually building programming that works. And I feel like we're getting to a place where we can really start to do that. I have the management team structure that I have in place who are capable of doing that. And so what do we know that works for people? Well, they got to have meaningful things to do during the day. I mean, I got to have that. Everybody I know needs to have some way of defining who they are rather than being a mental health patient. Like, they just need better than that. Healthy relationships for kids, they need attachments to competent, consistent adults, appropriate medications. They need a safe place to live. So what do we do, and what are we going to do? Outreach and engagement. So some of what happens with community mental health programs, and this is true everywhere I've ever been, is it becomes really easy to see the people who are good at making appointments, and who we neglect are the people who are really sick, who don't want to see us, they don't want to meet with us, and like a bad penny, we're going to be that mental health organization that even though they don't want to engage in services with us, we're going to develop relationships with them. So maybe they don't engage, but when they're ready, we'll know them and they'll know us. Substance abuse is, I think, a pretty significant issue in this community. I know it is in other communities too. As we develop our ACT program, we're going to have a strong emphasis on working with substance abuse. And a lot of that is motivational interviewing. It's helping people understand and getting them to a place where they're ready for treatment. There's this it feels like a canyon sometimes where somebody is like suffering all sorts of consequences because of substance abuse. But to get them from there to here, where they're willing and able to accept help, is such a huge gap. And so we have to get better at figuring out how to bridge that divide. And a lot of that is through that relationship development. Brief therapy. We have some clients who've been in services for years. Like, that's not right. We got to help them move along, figure out how to resolve some of their stuff, and get new folks in. Group treatments are great for decreasing isolation. Supported employment is the meaningful stuff to do during the day. And then, of course, crisis respite and short-term residential.
Is it difficult for clients to accept group treatments?
God, you guys are so smart. Yes, it is. Nobody wants to talk about their problems in front of other people. It is like such a Northern European thing. And the reality is, a lot of the reason why people suffer is social isolation, right? It sucks to feel like you are the only person and that nobody is connected to you. And what a better way than to get a group of folks together to help figure out how to move through life together. They can develop relationships outside of the group. It's such a great tool, and it's so hard to get them to do it. But if you have clinicians who really believe in that modality, it's totally possible. So now I want to talk about North Coast Crisis Respite. As you all know, because you're part of it, the North Coast Crisis Respite was born out of the Caring for Clatsop Coalition. And the members of that are Greater Oregon Behavioral Health, Columbia Memorial, Providence Seaside, and you all. So far, with the NCCRC, we've served 57 unique individuals. That was, I think, as of the end of March, so it's been more since then. As you can see, mostly it's been folks from in-county, and there's been some out of county, and of course we served a few folks from out of state. Our admissions have not been exactly where I would want them to be, but we've finally, I think, started to get into a groove. They shot up in March. In March, we got approval from the state to be able to provide residential services, which is fantastic. It means that for individuals that we bring into crisis respite, if we don't have an immediate disposition plan for them and they're too fragile to step back out into the community, we can actually hold on to them for a little bit longer. Yes.
When you said your admissions that are not where you would like them to be, could you elaborate on that? Do you mean, yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
We were doing pretty good in August. I think we had gotten up to like, obviously somewhere around 8. And then in November and December, we kind of had a hiccup. And some of that had to do with changeover in administration. We had an administrator leave, we had a contractor step in, and we got a new administrator hired in November. And sort of, it's kind of a combination of getting all the folks in the right place and agreement on who we were going to serve and how to get them in quickly that kind of led to the spike that started going up in March.
So when you say, where do you want your admissions to be? You want it to, like what's the capacity of the? So
right now, for us to have basically a break even financially, we need to have at least 2 crisis respite and 5 residential. The crisis respite clients are a little bit trickier from a financial standpoint, only because they come in for a short time and then they leave. And it's hard to have like the next person lined up and ready to go. Crisis respite programs are harder to sustain financially, and the ones that I am aware of around the state typically have some sort of capacity payment. They don't do it all on a per diem. So that's why having residential has been so critical, because that gives the program a little bit more consistency and stability. It's good for the clients and it's good for us financially.
Does that change the mission? I mean, is there a clear mission statement that incorporates all these different things that you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're trying to do is, it's basically, crisis respite offers the option of a step down for folks who are coming out of the hospital or out of the state hospital, that also prevents folks from going into the into acute care, and it allows us time for clients who step into residential to develop a longer sustainable community plan for them, such as housing. That's actually one of the biggest issues, is having appropriate housing for folks. And for a while prior to developing residential, we actually, on occasion, would have to discharge people to a shelter or no housing whatsoever, and that's just not ideal. It doesn't promote long-term stability. So,
Amy, can I ask you one
Yes.
thing? Well, I know that having mentally ill people in jails is a big problem. Are you going to speak to that later on, or at some point, could you please?
yes, absolutely. So at least 2 of those folks we've taken out of the jail. Currently, the Crisis Respite Center is not equipped to take people who are potentially aggressive. And actually, some of the partnership that we've had with the jail is that they've been able to start individuals on medications that have like kind of brought them down enough so that then we could transition them into crisis respite, and that's actually worked really well. There's been other occasions where we've not been able to do that, and they've actually had to go straight to the state hospital, and then we were able to admit them to crisis respite. But yes, I've seen the padded cell in the jail, and I agree, it's not the right place.
No, thank you.
So So basically, this is very non-scientific data that was compiled by me. And I looked at all of the individuals who had been placed at crisis respite, and I looked at their number of ED visits prior to admission and the number of ED visits while they were in crisis respite, and then ED visits post-discharge.
Wow.
Now, granted, this data makes me look really good, but I'm going to give you the caveat in case you haven't already figured it out. The time before them going into crisis respite is much longer, given the newness of the program, than the time post-discharge. So you have to take that data with a grain of salt. But the reality is we've served some folks who have had multiple visits to the ED, and we were able to stabilize them, create appropriate discharge plans, and get them into the community.
Well, is this post-discharge, is it just weeks or months or?
It's any time after their stay in crisis respite to the time that I did the study. So they could have had like, a year and a half pre-admission and 2 months post-discharge. That's why I'm telling you to look at it with a grain of salt.
Okay. It'd be good to see this in a year.
Yes. So what else are we doing with our child and family program? Again, another one of those things that you end up doing because it makes everybody feel good, but it doesn't necessarily make a difference, is that with kids, it's really important to do family systems work. It really is. It's not to say that parents cause problems for kids. It's that for kids to be successful, their environment needs to work around them based on how they're presenting. And the more consistent the environment is, both at home and in school, the more likely those kids are to be successful. And so we're really pushing for being able to do family work over individual counseling with kids. System of care is so important, having everybody come up with one plan of care for a child so that everyone's on the same page. Community-based case management. I say evidence-based medication management for my doctors, but basically having a good medical standard of care. Support our medical team. Some of this I've already talked about. We are training all of our clinicians, both on the child and adult side, in the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. It is, you can't call it evidence-based because it's really hard to research something that doesn't happen. But basically, it's a tool that's been shown to be very effective at predicting who's high risk for actually completing suicide. So it gives us another tool when we're assessing people both in session and in crisis situations.
So Amy, we were talking last night, there are a couple of children in the community, teenagers, down in our neighborhood and in some other places who have committed suicide. How can you catch those kids before? Do you know? Or can you? Maybe that's unrealistic.
I think, so I have to believe you can. Because if I don't think you can, then I shouldn't be in this business. But I do think there are some things that communities do around often kids who are suicide will tell somebody, and they'll tell their friends. And so developing programs like question per se, not programs, but trainings for individuals who come into contact with youth who might be suicidal, like question, persuade, respond. They call them gatekeeper trainings, but it's basically to help increase the awareness of folks who are around kids who they might talk to, including their peers, so that they can recognize and report the signs of suicidality.
It's just a heartbreaker.
It's awful. It's absolutely awful. And implementing a strong quality management program. I don't have that I don't have in place what I need in order to be able to really effectively monitor our services, and that's something that has to be in place for our next budget cycle.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that question. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
It's having a strong quality management program. It's a multiple of things. It's one, it's being able to respond to complaints. There are complaints that I get that I know where they're coming from, and I understand that it's based on some of the policies that we have, and there are others where we screwed up. And it's a training and a learning opportunity for our staff. And so it's having a strong system that collects those, that we look at data around how does our access look. It's being able to respond and learn from incidents that are concerning. It's all of those things so that we have a close internal, monitoring system so that we know where our holes and gaps are.
Your risk management, basically.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to hearing more about that quality management program.
Great.
I think that's spot on. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's a piece that's missing. You have the board, you have staff, but that's important.
Great. Opening the secure beds. I have been strongly encouraged to put together a timeline around what it's going to take to make that happen. So we've done a lot of the steps. I don't think we're that far away from it. There's a few additional steps. Like we have to make sure that we're financially sound enough to be able to do that. I feel much more confident given that we were able to get the residential funding piece in place. We've had the state come out and visit and work with us and talk with us about exactly what that looks like and what we need to be credentialed as a level 2 provider. And I don't think we're that far away from that, but I need to work on putting a timeline together. And then, of course, next year's budget, as you all know, well, maybe you don't know, but from the state perspective and from the Oregon Health Authority, at this point, it doesn't look good. So I imagine that's going to have some level of impact on us.
Why is that? What do you mean it doesn't look good?
Well, the last that I saw was and I don't know if you saw the Ways and Means budget. It looked a little bit like a scare tactic to me. I can't remember what the total deficit was for OHA, but it was pretty significant. They were looking at about a $20 million cut to community mental health programs. There was the possibility of eliminating the addictions and dental benefit from OHP, which I know they're not going to do. They can't do that. That means they have to reopen the waiver with the feds. That's why I think it's a scare tactic, but it definitely doesn't look good.
So getting down to your level of operations, I hear a risk.
Yes, I am.
Do you have an ask of us? I mean, is there anything?
No, I think
What do we do to find $2 billion? I don't know.
what I have learned, having been in the behavioral health business now for 20 years, is that we go through this. It seems like it's about every 6 or 7 years, and I think it'll be bad. I don't think it'll be as bad as 2001 when they eliminated the OHP benefit altogether. And what I've learned is to not overreact until I actually find out what it's going to be. So.
Okay, well, we know some people on Ways and Means, so maybe we could
put in a pitch for behavioral health. So the last time I did this presentation, I had chairs on a sunny beach, and that's when I was more naive and optimistic. And so this time, the end picture is actually somebody hiking because I am absolutely clear on the road I have ahead of me, and we're not there yet. So.
Great. Thank you so much for that report, Amy. Does any of the commissioners have any final comments or questions?
Well, I would like to thank you for staying to your commitment. When you first came to us saying that you would keep us apprised, you would come to us regularly and give us reports of where things were and problems and success, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I'd like to thank you. I'd like to acknowledge your board member, City Councilor Tita Montero, who's here. You have, I think, a stronger board, and I think we're all enormously grateful for the work that you and your board do in this community. You're vitally important to our community's well-being, and our capacity to take care of each other is really what we need to be doing as community.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Have a great evening. All right. That concludes our presentations. Now we're going to move on to business from the public. This is an opportunity for anyone to give a 3-minute presentation about any item on the agenda except public hearings. So if you're here concerning the Arch Cape issue, then we'll take care of that in the public hearing. But if there's any other issue, there are green slips over there. And any topic of county concern that is not on the agenda, except public hearings. People wishing to speak during business from the public must fill out and sign a public comment signing card. We have one guest tonight. Mr. Gaffney, come on up. And this is kind of a unique situation. I see that with the blessing of the board, I'm going to allow Mr. Gaffney to exceed the 3 minutes for public comment and welcome. And we'd just like to have an opportunity to hear a report, more like as in a presentation, if it's okay with the board. And I would also allow questions from the board tonight due to the special nature of our relationship.
Great.
I got the form here and I had a brief opportunity to look through it really quickly. And it looks like you've been busy. So I'm really curious to hear your report, and welcome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time, and I'll try to stick close to the 3 minutes, but if we want to go beyond, that's your choice. I just wanted to live up to my promise to keep you appraised of what is going on. I've been doing the job now for 5.5 weeks, and during that time, we've been able to address a few key things, and that's what's in your handout there. I've, number one, tried to make sure that what I do on behalf of you as a contractor aligns with the practices of the county. And so I've taken a little bit of time from Cam Moore and Monica Steele and Robin Coach and Joe Quackenbush just to make sure I'm clear on the procedures that are typically used by the county. Things such as advertising, interviewing, interfacing with the federal government to make sure that the county receives the funds that are appropriated for this preschool feasibility project, and just simply working to clarify working arrangements. I don't see that there's going to be a great deal of staff time needed in the future, but I will continue to touch base as need be, and of course they know how to reach me if they have questions too. So with that said, I just want to acknowledge the help that I've gotten from them. I've started to put together an advisory committee that represents both Clatsop and Tillamook County. I am reaching out to folks that represent the county governments, the 8 school districts, preschool and child care providers, the Northwest Regional ESD, which provides the special education services for pre-kindergarten children, the Hispanic Council, and parent advocates. All are represented in a fairly small, when you look at that list, it looks pretty long, but I tried to get, a few folks from each county representing those different areas. And close to finishing up the commitments from that. Everybody I've asked has said yes, without hesitation, which is a great sign. We have received a service grant from an organization based out of the University of Utah called the Sorensen Impact Center. And the service they provide is focused on data collection, analysis of that data, organizing that data as we bring it in from different agencies and organizations throughout our 2 counties. And they will help us in terms of presenting that in such a way that it's easy to understand and clear and will help in future decisions. They actually came before I started doing this work for a day and a half, and I pulled together a few individuals to begin to understand how this works. And a couple days later, I had statistics that were accurate, that told us about the number of 3- and 4-year-old children in the 2 counties that we want to serve. That's not easy data to come up with. And so I'm very excited about the relationship we have with them. Yes, please.
Dan, is that the vendor that we talked about that you would be hiring to help you with the statistics?
No.
That's someone.
This is a separate grant that provides a service that's focused on administrative data collection. So it's complementary. It was available only to those organizations that were pursuing a Pay for Success feasibility project. We applied for it and got it. And they were anxious to get started before we were actually officially started. And they're going to come up again later this month and help us trying to clarify a little bit more.
So you'll still be looking for a vendor that goes with the grant?
I'm going to touch on that in just a few moments. Yep. But to answer your question, yes.
Thank you.
But because of that opportunity that the Sorensen Impact Center brings to us, I've gone through and I've kind of changed the job description of the assistant we have to hire. We have a funding in there for a part-time assistant, which we referred to as a data collection assistant. But now we've got these folks who are really skilled and experienced in collecting and helping us organize data. So really what I need now is somebody to help me in making contacts in the communities. And so I've redesigned the position as a community resources assistant that'll help me in reaching out throughout Tillamook and Clatsop counties to find out what resources are already in place, what resources are needed, that type of thing. And so that position is being advertised now in all the Clatsop County papers, all the Tillamook County papers, the Facebook programs that the newspapers have, and I'm hopeful that we'll find somebody to come on board to help us with that. The other thing that's happened is, and again, it seems like every other day or once a week there's a new pleasant surprise that comes. We received an invitation from the Urban Institute, which is based out of Washington, D.C. And I'd never heard of them, so I contacted Cam. I said, do you know anything about them? And he says, oh yes, they're a great reputable organization. And what they've done is they've invited all 8 of the organizations that the U.S. Department of Ed awarded this preschool feasibility project to come back to Washington, D.C. for an intensive couple days to help us in understanding better the type of data and the type of evaluations that we should be aiming at collecting, as well as helping us as individual groups figure out what outcomes do we really want to go after and how best to measure those. So they've got experience. They're bringing in experts in this area that have background with Pay for Success, but also have background in other types of financing, which we are dedicated to pursue. And so the Urban Institute is providing a significant amount of money for travel and lodging. Part of our grant, we have some money budgeted for travel. Part of our grant money for travel will be used for that too. But this is a golden opportunity that we couldn't pass up, and they're paying for 2 folks. And so I've asked and received permission to have Kim Lyon, who is the ESD administrator in Tillamook County, has a background with the early childhood providers in Tillamook County. She's going to go with me. And then Maria Stark, who's our national Wellville navigator that focuses in on Clatsop County. She actually lives in New York, and she's going to come down at her own expense to join us. So we'll actually have 3 people listening and learning and talking about what we need in Northwest Oregon. And so now, Kathleen, to address yours, we're in the midst right now of the proposals that were requested nationwide for the intermediary, which would be the firm that would help guide us through this process. Those were due the 3rd of this month. So I assembled a team to help me go through and read those and score those. We had a 3-page scoring card that we used to go through each of the proposals based upon the expectations, the desires we have for an intermediary. We scored those, and today I conducted interviews, phone interviews with them to get some further clarifications, and now next step is we'll do some reference checks on folks that they have worked with in the past. So we're in that process, and so I would hope that in the next few weeks I'll come back to you with a recommendation via CAM in terms of who to offer a contract to serve as our intermediary. And I guess the last thing is to say that last week I had a chance to go down to Tillamook and meet with the Great Beginnings group. It's their kind of their monthly gathering of their early childhood providers and leaders, most of whom I had not met before. And after a 45-minute true conversation, they're all on board and anxious to see what more we can learn and do together to improve the lives of our kids in our community. So that's what I've been up to the last 5.5 weeks. And
we really appreciate, Dan, the update. It's really important to us. And that being said, is there any comments or questions for Mr. Gaffney? Great. Again, thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, seeing no more business from the public, I'd look for a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented.
So move. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now we're going to move on to the business agenda. Our first item is the Lewis and Clark Tree Farms Access Assessment, page 87. Welcome. May I have the staff report, please?
Sorry.
Good evening. I'm Michael Summers, Clatsop County Public Works Director. Before you, Commission to consider granting an access easement to Lewis and Clark Tree Farms LLC across the county-owned land. It's a piece of land that the county has owned since the 1930s that has been used by the road department as a stockpile site for fill for road construction spoils. And the timber company is the neighboring landowner, and they have recently constructed an office, moved their office up the hill to the adjacent land of their ownership. The roads department, the roads division, Clatsop County Public Works has pretty much reached the end of the useful life of this particular 3-acre chunk of land. This land is located on, it's on Lewis and Clark Road, about maybe a mile and a half east of Seaside at the top of the hill. And we've reached the end of its useful life, and the consideration is for the granting an access easement so they can traverse across the county-owned land to access Lewis and Clark Road, which will improve their fire protection and provide a secondary means of access to their new office facility. They ultimately would like to purchase the property from the county and go into exploring purchase and sale agreement for this parcel. So here for any questions, we recommend approving the easement. So.
Yeah, Michael, there's those on the left side of the road coming from here. There's all those boulders there on the left side of the road that prevents vehicles from getting off there where that blowdown area was. That's on the left, right? Am I in the right spot here?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And so this is that little spot on the kind of the top of the hill where there's a power line there. I know that spot. So that's a county owns that.
Yes, if you look on the page 92 of your packet, we have their office facilities
there it
over
is.
here. And it's this little kind of, I don't know, rectangular, quasi-rectangular section of land that the county has owned since the 30s and used as a kind of a construction site spoils area. Over the, it's that tax lot 300 is kind of an odd shape and about 3 acres in size. So we would like to explore them purchasing this property in the future. But today it's just to grant them an access easement.
That seems pretty straightforward. Thank you for that report.
So,
If the commissioners don't have any questions for staff, entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the local agency agreement with the Oregon Department of Transportation for Lewis and Clark and Logan Road safety improvements and authorize the county manager to sign
Ma'am?
the agreement and any amendments. Wrong page?
Yeah.
we're on page
Sorry,
87.
I'm on the next one. That's
Bottom of 87.
bottom of 87. I'm where the map is, okay. Okay, I move to grant the permanent access easement to Lewis and Clark Tree Farm. I was ready for the money, Michael. I
That's
move
next.
to grant the permanent access easement to Lewis and Clark Tree Farms across a county-owned parcel and authorize the county manager to sign. Please forgive me. That's what I'm after.
Second?
We have a motion, a second, to grant permanent access to Lewis and Clark Tree Farms across the county-owned parcel and authorize the county manager to sign. Seeing no further deliberations, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Michael. Have a great evening. Oh, wait, you might not be
Wait,
done.
we've got
I'm not
money.
done yet.
I was ready for the money first.
Our next item is local agency agreement for Lewis and Clark Road improvements, page 93.
Once again, Michael Summers, Public Works Director, Clatsop County. So this is this project has been in the works for several years. Back in 2012, there was a large transportation safety analysis done through most roadways in the country. And Oregon participated in this analysis. And what they did was they analyzed the crash data and came up with which roadways have a higher history of crashes, and Lewis and Clark Road, which is a county road which goes between Miles Crossing at the Miles Crossing Junction all the way about 13 miles plus into Seaside through the Lewis-Clark Valley over the hills and into Seaside. So the state of Oregon initially wanted to construct this project for the county roadway under the state's resources back in 2014, but through some capacity issues and funding constraints that the state has had, they've asked essentially if the county would like to be granted the funding, and then the county forces design and construct the project. So this project is for some safety improvements along really the entirety of the roadway. There's 2 elements of it. The first one being, it's called fixed object removal, and fixed objects are things on the side of the road like mailboxes, telephone poles, retaining walls, fences, trees. Trees are common in this neck of the woods, especially the upper part of the hills, boulders, gates, any of those things that one might encounter on the side of the roadway, especially in rural, curvy sections of road like Lewis and Clark is. They're pretty prominent. The other element of this project is to install or explore installing shoulder rumble strips. Probably encountered those on state highways. 26 has a fair amount of them. 30 has several stretches of rumble strips either in the center line or on the shoulder along the edge of the pavement. So it's also to install these. The rumble strips wouldn't be installed across the entire length of Lewis and Clark Road, the entire 13 miles, because they're not really, there's 2 constraints to that. They're not really ideal in residential areas. There's sections of Logan Road, and there's a lot of residences in the northern part of Lewis and Clark Road for about the first, in front next to the elementary school. At the northern end, from Miles Crossing, about the first 3 miles, there's lots of residences there, so it'll probably be more disruptive to the residents. And there's also the other constraint being the pavement is fairly narrow, and the state and I think that it may not be the best fit. But there's a lot of sections, several miles, that it may be warranted with the appropriate pavement type and enough width of the pavement surface in order to install shoulder rumble strips. The hope being that it'll kind of, when you get on the rumble strip, it kind of wakes you up and keep the cars on the road and not going off the roadway.
So Michael,
So, go ahead.
I was up there, that Lewis and Clark has built their new headquarters up there, and they're not on 101 anymore in Gearhart, they're up the hill.
Up there.
So it's up there.
Very windy.
Very windy, very, pay attention to this because you want to stay on the road. But in my mind, it's a reasonable alternative route, the back route out of Seaside, should there be inundation in Seaside.
Absolutely.
That's your plan too, right? Will that'll make that better for that? Do you think that road is going to be stable do you have any idea at all?
There's a fair amount of that road that is landslide prone, especially from mile, let me see if there's a map. There's the map, there's about 3 sections. The most curvy part through the Melville area, right about in here, is pretty landslide prone. But landslides, little landslides like they're likely going to happen, can be generally pushed out of the way with equipment. This project won't really mitigate for any seismic or alternate route kind of stuff. It's more of a traffic safety kind of a project. That's more of a daily occurrence, not necessarily daily, but it's an immediate type of a phenomenon that we're going to mitigate for, rather than the seismic event, which could happen anytime between now and tens of years from now. So this is a help try and mitigate some roadway departure, some off the road type vehicle accidents more immediately. We're targeting summer of 18 to construct this. That's one thing that's interesting about this agreement, is it doesn't really have a time frame for us to implement it. Just so we're targeting the summer of 18. Summer of 17, probably not feasible, but about a year from now. Design it in the fall, and probably next spring or summer complete the project. So.
Yeah, it's just as there's more and more traffic along 101, this becomes the alternate route for people who know about it to get from Astoria to Seaside.
Right. I have
Absolutely.
one comment on that. Shoulders, expansion of the shoulder, obviously, that would be a great, but that doesn't include it in this project, not really.
Not included with this project. And I think what we can do, what we're going to do with the design folks, me and the 2 technicians, is we'll probably look to supplement some of this money with some of our own county money, road money, to maybe make some targeted improvements. If there might be if there's a gap where we have rumble strips and narrow shoulders and another section of rumble strips, we'll probably build in that shoulder a little bit in there just to kind of make it more continuous. We'll try and develop some tricks and strategic spots to kind of make it more of a cohesive improvement. So,
Yeah.
the amount is for $111,672 dollars. It's a reimbursable grant. So we expend the funds, hire the contractor, do the work, and then get reimbursed with invoices to the state.
So no bicycle money available, right?
I was going to let you do that for me. Because that, interestingly enough, that is part of the coastal adventure cycling route that starts here. It doesn't go down that part of 101 through Warrington. It actually goes back way to Seaside.
Yeah.
So that's the beginning of the coastal route. And as a side note, before I look for a motion, concerning your concerns about that back road, from this point here, one of the things I was talking to somebody about, the old railroad grade for the Lewis and Clark Main Line logging road starts right here and goes straight up to where they built the new, and that's a solid, and it doesn't have all the slide problems that you get down in the valley there where you're trying to fight in between the hillside and the creek.
Yeah.
And so this is to
Resilience.
plant a bug in your ear. This is a great opportunity to maybe find out the resources available to turn that main line into a possible,
If we could have some kind of back route to get people all the way down the county, because when I see the plans that show alternative routes from, Seaside to Astoria, I'm thinking, what about the people who want to go south? What about the people who live south? How can we, And even if we can't have a full-fledged two-lane highway, if we could have a road route, if we could have, road bed route, if we could have something where bicycles could go, where people could walk, it's good for health, it's good for resilience. It's just good to have a backup plan and a backup road.
It's about redundancy in the network, and it'll help for many, many functions with commerce, business,
Yeah.
people, bikes, etc. So,
All that. Thank you for thinking about that.
Betcha. Look for a motion.
Shirley, I move to approve the local agency agreement with the Oregon Department of Transportation for Lewis and Clark and Logan Road safety improvements and authorize the county manager to sign the agreement and any amendments.
Second.
We have a motion to approve the local agency agreement with the Oregon Department of Transportation for Lewis and Clark and Logan Road safety improvements and authorize the county manager to sign the agreement and any amendments. Seeing no further deliberations, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the approval of some budget adjustments in the 2016 budget, page 107. All right. May I have the staff report, please?
Good evening, Monica Steele, Budget and Finance Director. So before you is an R&O required by ORS 294.463 for adjustments for the fiscal year 16-17 that are required to be to avoid being in violation of budget law. The need for the adjustments is further explained in your Appendix A within your budget packet. The potential fiscal impact is $0, as these adjustments are within the funds that either have adequate budgeted contingency, and therefore the adjustment is for appropriation authority only, have offsetting revenue, or have adequate budget authority. However, per local budget law, the adjustment must be made to spend between categories. And so the total of these adjustments is $700,290, but of that, only $5,850 reduces the budgeted contingency in the general fund.
Thank you for that staff report. Seeing we really have no other options here to consider, I would look for a motion to approve these year-end budget appropriation adjustments as
Shirley,
required.
I move that the board approve the year-end budget adjustments to remain in compliance with Oregon local budget law per ORS 294.463.
Second.
We have a motion to second that the board approve the year-end budget adjustments to remain in compliance with Oregon budget law per ORS 294.463. Seeing no further deliberations, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We're now going to move on to a public hearing. This is a time set for a public hearing on ordinance 17-02, replacing ordinance 16-03 and ordinance adopting legislative text amendments to the Clatsop County Comprehensive Plan and Land and Water Development and Use Ordinance number 80-14 regarding the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee, the Arch Cape Rural Community, and additional requirements for citizen involvement countywide and declaring an emergency. Commissioner Sullivan, have you reviewed the record for this matter?
Yes, I have.
Does any commissioner have a conflict of interest to report? May we have the staff report, please?
Yes. I think you are all familiar with Chris Crean, who is our county land use counsel on this issue, and also Heather Hansen, who is the community development director. So between the two of them, they will give you a staff update.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, Lee, members of the commission. Chris Crane, Special Counsel, Land Use Counsel. Very briefly, you may recall that these amendments were approved by the board in September. They were appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, which remanded the decision. I wanted to just touch on that very briefly. And then turn it over, well, a couple of issues, and then turn it over to Heather for some practical comments about the amendments. The opponents raised three issues at LUBA, and we'll just run through those very briefly. The first was that we failed to publish notice in the Historian of the Board of County Commissioners meeting last September, and sure enough, we didn't. We published notice of the Planning Commission meetings and Arch Cape Committee meetings, but not that one, and it's an on-off switch, LUBA said. So if you didn't publish notice, you have to go back and do it again, and that's why we're here. And in case you're interested, we did point out to LUBA the town crier, what I call the town crier aspect of that statute. There are counties in the state that don't even have a newspaper of general circulation anymore, so what do they do? But really, that's a problem for the legislature, and LUBA said it's an on-off switch, so we're sending it back to you. The opponents also argued that we failed to comply with notice requirements in the county code, dealing with things like mailing to the property owners and so on, and LUBA rejected those arguments and upheld the county's decision because we did in fact comply with those. They also argued that the decision violated statewide planning goal 1, which, as you may know, is the planning goal that requires the county to ensure public involvement. And LUBA rejected those arguments as well and affirmed that the county's decision was in fact consistent with goal 1, public involvement. The opponents also argued that there's a provision in the Southwest Coast Community Plan element of your comprehensive plan that says the Arch Cape Committee may continue to persist if it continues to meet. And they said, well, that means as long as we continue to meet, the board can't terminate us. And you may recall in September, I described all of the reasons why that was not an accurate interpretation of that code provision. But LUBA said, look, we have to send it back to you anyway, so we're going to not reach that argument and let the county board interpret that provision in the first instance rather than LUBA doing it for you. So we did go ahead and one of the material differences, the only differences, frankly, between the decision last time in September and the decision this time is we did include some specific findings on that provision and why the opponent's interpretation is not correct. And just very briefly, there's no statute or case authority for the notion that a committee that is created by the county board, whose members are appointed by the county board, who exists to advise the county board, cannot also be terminated by the board. It's inconsistent with the county's home rule authority and the cases that interpret that. It's inconsistent with the language of the provision itself, which says the committee may continue to persist. It doesn't say shall or must. It simply describes one reason the board might terminate the committee if they're no longer meeting, but in no way prescribes or circumscribes the county's policy, the county board's policy authority to establish when or what advisory committees it wants. So there are findings to that effect, and that's one of the only differences, frankly, between the ordinance in September and the ordinance before you now. So it's back. I assure you, we published notice in the Astorian of tonight's meeting. We have covered that. It's not a problem anymore. Again, LUBA ruled that the amendments are consistent with Goal 1, citizen involvement. There are findings now that specifically interpret that code provision, and by the way, LUBA is required to defer to the board's interpretation of its own code and its own comprehensive plan, so we're pretty comfortable with that. And then very briefly touching on a few of the legal reasons last September why the board thought it was important to go ahead and terminate the committee. There were concerns about the board's ability to comply with the procedural requirements for a quasi-judicial land use hearing in state law. That's ORS 197.763. There were concerns about compliance with public meetings law requirements, compliance with public records requirements, and concerns about potential employee claims, including things like stress claims, ADA claims, and hostile work environment claims. And then with respect to the timeline, as you know, if under the county charter, the ordinance can be approved in one meeting if it declares an emergency and it's unanimous. If not, there has to be a second reading in 2 weeks, after which it would become final. The Community Development Director, Ms. Hanson, and I were looking at a code provision in your code today, 2.051, that says certain, type 2, 2A, 3, and type 4 decisions don't become final until all appeals are resolved. And the question was that legislative as well as quasi-judicial? But your charter says ordinances become effective more than 30 days after they're approved. And so if that delayed language, final date language in the code provision would allow an ordinance not to become final within 30 days, it's inconsistent with the charter, and the charter prevails over any inconsistent language in your code. It's also, so we want to include a finding that says that provision is specific to type 4 quasi-judicial decisions and not the kind of legislative decision that's before you tonight. So that's all I have, and I will turn it over to Ms. Hanson.
Thank you.
Okay.
Heather, did you have anything to add?
Yes, I wanted to give some background, not as much as I have in the past, and I'm not going to do a full staff report. But
And this also addresses a lot of the issues that have been raised in the written comment, and so just entered into the record a packet of materials. They're all emails that I received or the county manager's office received as of 3 p.m. this afternoon, and I didn't see any others that I in my inbox before I came over here. So there's 6 community planning areas identified in the Clatsop County Comprehensive Plan: Northeast, Clatsop Plains, Lewis and Clark, Olney, Woluski, Elsie Jewell, Seaside Rural, and Southwest Coastal. Citizen advisory committees were formed in each of the 6 community planning areas for the sole purpose of advising on development of the community plans, which are part of the comprehensive plan, or comp plan. After the comp plan was acknowledged in 1980, the Clatsop Plains and Elsie Jewell community advisory committees, or CACs I'll call them, continued for a short duration, and only a modified version of the Southwest Coastal CAC remained active. However, the committee's current role is greatly expanded from the intended role of the CACs, and they only address land use issues within the Arch Cape rural community, not Falcon Cove, not Cove Beach, not Arcadia, or anywhere else in the Southwest Coastal community area. Just the roughly 300 acres of the Arch Cape rural community within the 3,000-acre Southwest Coastal area. The committee clearly added value by advising on the development of the Southwest Coastal Community Plan and the zoning regulations in the development code that implemented that plan. Their recommendations have certainly affected the look, feel, and sense of place in the Southwest Coastal Community area, because the zoning regulations in the development code must be met in order to develop land within that area. And the zoning regulations are the reason there aren't strip malls along Highway 101 or tall houses allowed along the oceanfront or more native vegetation removal than there may have been otherwise. And those are the same regulations applied by staff and the Planning Commission when reviewing any proposed development in the Arch Cape area. The proposed amendments also enhance community involvement countywide by requiring posting of properties subject to a hearing, which we didn't have before, applicant neighborhood meetings for certain types of development, also new, and required notices sent to county recognized neighborhood organizations in addition to adjacent property owners. We've also created a web page, which is now active, with a map that illustrates all pending land use applications with files attached for people to review online. The issue before you tonight is not about whether citizen involvement is important to Clatsop County Board of Commissioners or whether the committee's input has added value to development in a particular geographic area of the county. It's about the appropriate role for a county-appointed committee that advises on land use decisions, and it's about the county's land use regulations being applied fairly and consistently throughout the county. I mentioned that the county's role greatly expanded since the Southwest Coastal Community Plan was developed in the late 70s and implemented through the county's development code. Under their design review role, the committee reviews all structures and expansions of existing footprints, including accessory structures so small they don't require building permits. This is more akin to the role of a design review committee of a neighborhood association that has CC&Rs that they're implementing. These types of development are not considered land use decisions anywhere else in the county and are generally processed over the counter. For example, if you want to build a house anywhere outside of Arch Cape rural community, you bring in plans and they are reviewed by planning staff to ensure they meet all the development standards in the zone that they are in, such as setbacks, building height, lot coverage, parking, access, etc. The development standards for building a house should be clear and objective, so they are applied fairly and consistently, regardless of who the applicant is or where they are from. If the house meets all the standards, the applicant can then apply for building permits and begin construction soon after. The fee for this type of review is $75. In Arch Cape, to build the same house, the applicant would pay an additional $711 for a special design review. Staff would send a notice out to property owners within 250 feet. The applicant or representative would present their plans at a hearing at the next regularly scheduled committee meeting. The committee would make a recommendation to the director based on the development standards in the development code. Then I would make the decision and issue a notice, and the applicant could then apply for building permits once the appeal period is over. This additional step adds at least 4 to 6 weeks to the process of building a house in Arch Cape. I'm almost done. The vast majority of applications the committee reviews are for design review of new single-family houses, additions, decks, and accessory structures. But the committee also reviews all other types of land use applications, again, only within the Arch Cape rural community, including conditional uses, variances, rezones, subdivisions, et cetera, and makes a recommendation to either the director or the planning commission, depending on the type of application. All the reviews must rely upon existing land use regulations, the same ones used by the director or planning commission in making their decision. There are no community plans being updated at this time, so the only reason the committee is the only active CAC is because their role greatly expanded over time. If the Southwest Community Plan were to be reviewed and revised, an advisory committee would be formed, and it would include a much broader representation than residents and property owners in Arch Cape. It would include residents, property owners, business owners from throughout the Southwest coastal area, as well as representatives from agencies such as the Sewer and Water District, State Parks, State Forestry, ODOT, et cetera. So is the committee's current role appropriate, and are the county's land use regulations being applied fairly and consistently throughout the county? They are an advisory committee appointed by you, the board, and that is for you, the board, to decide. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for that staff report. I have one question. I'm curious about, Chris, the 30 days. So basically, if this public hearing is extended to May 24th, the harm exposure to the county increases for another 30-day period?
That's correct. If it goes to second reading, and then there would be the 30-day, it would be an additional 6 weeks from tonight. So before the ordinance would become effective. So the Arch Cape Committee would continue to exist for that 6-week period.
And expose the county to risk?
All of the concerns that we have. Right.
Okay, very good. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for staff?
I have a question. How much approximately has it been for the cost of the 2 LUBA hearings, the appeals to the LUBA hearings?
You probably better answering that. I don't have.
To be honest with you, I don't know. I haven't done a tally. It's, several $1,000s certainly.
Yeah, it's unfortunate the Daily Historian admitted that, and it's costing the county and the taxpayers money because of the failure of the Daily Historian to properly notice now.
And I mean, any county expenditure shouldn't be done without due diligence, right? But one of the things, I mean, the reason that as the county council, one of my jobs is to advise the county on risk management. And the concern is that the potential risks from a financial perspective that this committee presents far outweigh what a LUBA appeal has cost.
Could you give me a specific example of a risk that you think would happen between now and 6 weeks from now, particularly since there are no plans in front of the committee right now?
Well, there are people waiting for the action of this board before submitting any applications for building a house.
There are also houses that are being built now, aren't there? Aren't there structures being put up now without the committee?
There were, because the committee didn't exist until the remand came back from LUBA. Right. So there were about 4, I think I wrote down, I think there were 4 houses that were built in the interim.
4 houses?
Right.
Is that
One of the specific concerns is that the committee is staffed by county staff, and the facility where they meet, if we still have the same staff staffing them, doesn't accommodate a recognized disability, and the county does have an obligation to accommodate disabilities. So, I mean, we may be able to staff around that, so I don't want to say that it's an absolute problem, but that's a concern.
It was my understanding that they did move the meeting, and then the third meeting, which they had purchased some soundproofing, that meeting didn't take place, so they never even got a chance to try that out.
Yes, and also we had several committee members check out the facility, some of whom also have hearing disabilities, and according to them, it was not adequate. And the last time the committee met, they voted to no longer accommodate staff. That was the actual motion, was to, we've accommodated staff long enough, and we're going to meet at the fire station.
Chris, could you elaborate on that motion by the advisory committee?
Not an open session. Yeah. I'd prefer not to.
Can you say that it exposes the county to great risk?
It certainly does. It certainly does. I mean, federal ADA claims would be very expensive for the county to defend, even if you won. And if you lost, it would be even more expensive. So it's a legitimate concern.
Well, my concern is that this committee has been in process for a long time. And if there are problems, then we should solve them rather than disband them.
We have tried, I don't know how many times Chris has done a training about hearing procedures and how to communicate outside of a hearing. It was before I got here too. I don't know.
And again, it's, even if we could, we can get people up to speed on what we call the 763 procedures from 197, ORS 197.763. I have concerns about public meetings laws compliance, because anytime a quorum of this committee deliberates on something that's before them without publishing notice, without taking minutes, without giving the public an opportunity to participate, it's a violation of the public meeting laws. And I haven't asked that question specifically of any of the members because I don't really want to know the answer. I think I know what the answer is, whether they've done that. So there's another training there, and then there's another meeting on public records laws, because all of those emails now flying back and forth among people are public records. Are they being kept forwarded to the county so they can be properly archived? So having this committee serve as a function of the county on county letterhead raises a number of issues.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this shows the reason for the declaration of emergency.
Could I ask a question of staff, Mr. Chair?
Please.
So we talked a lot about this. It's been a long, thoughtful process from our point of view. And the overriding concern I had was neighborhood livability, because I've been an advocate of neighborhood livability for a long time. I've been an advocate of citizen participation for a long time. What I was looking for was a way to do neighborhood livability and citizen participation in a way that honored the people and the place, that actually took into account the way the committee operated or chose not to operate, and the exposure to risk. Because sitting on this dais, my responsibility is to look to the financial well-being of everybody in this county, and the exposure to risk through ADA claims and judgments, through hostile work environment, violations of public meeting law, violations of public records laws, in addition to concerns that neighbors raised with me. They had not gone forward into legal action, but some of them were contemplating that. So what I looked for was, how do we maintain neighborhood livability? How do we enhance citizen participation? Because I was attacked at a community potluck for what I was doing or not doing by the person who exempted my neighborhood from being included in Arch Cape Design Review. So people's memories falter in these regards, because that person had talked to me several times about how she had opted our neighborhood out of design review. But then I was somehow at fault for not defending design review. So this gets very personal within the neighborhood. It's also a matter for me, did we make these opportunities generally available for everybody in Clatsop County, not to diminish what can legally happen and what should happen to enhance livability and citizen participation, not only in Arch Cape, in every single neighborhood all over Clatsop County. We want to maintain livability. We want to maintain citizen participation. So when I went through and looked at all of the opportunities that you provided in this revised statute, I saw citizen participation. I saw protection of neighborhood livability at the very lowest level so that neighbors were empowered. And the question is, for me, how are most neighbors most empowered to protect their livability? And I saw it in the revised ordinance.
Very good points. I think really we've demonstrated the urgency of this and that it's really a fiduciary responsibility of the board to reduce risk. This question is not really about whether, I think the record's been fairly clear. Do any of the,
Could I just say one more thing?
Please.
We've got in our neighborhood, we got a great neighborhood association. We established a safety committee because we had safety concerns. And I thought to myself, well, you know, the neighborhood association could also establish a design review committee. And it could function very well within the neighborhood association, right in our own neighborhood. We could have a homeowners association that would have legal authority to impose design review standards. And that's a very structured way. The first is more informal, the second is more structured. We have options that are available. I think what's hard for me is that my neighbors, good friends and neighbors, everybody's trying to do the best they can on this, say, here's the solution you have to implement, and if you don't, you're a bad person. Well, that doesn't enhance neighborhood livability. For me, neighborhood livability means we collaborate respectfully and with affection with each other to come to common purpose and common actions. And the legal structure we have had doesn't do that. We have options. The ordinance gives us options. A homeowners association gives us option. And the community club, as I said, could have a design review committee under its auspices that gives us an effective option to protect our neighborhood livability. Thank you.
is there any more questions or comments for staff? Seeing none, may we have the first reading by short title only, please?
Before the Board of Commissioners for the County of Clatsop, an ordinance adopting legislative text amendments to the Comprehensive Plan and Land and Water Development and Use Ordinance number 80-14 regarding the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee, Arch Cape Rural Committee, and additional requirements for citizen involvement countywide and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. I will now open the public hearing. If you wish to testify, please come forward, give your name and address for the record. You will have 3 minutes to speak. As I've said before, it's very important that we follow the 3-minute rule and be fair to all the folks that want to speak tonight. Is there anybody tonight that would like to speak to this? Good evening. Please state your name and address for the record. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Michael Manzulli, 80285 Woodland Heights, Arch Cape, Oregon. Thanks for having us tonight. I had, that was nice to hear Heather actually say something positive about the CAC and some of the good work we've done. It is honestly the first time I've heard that from the county in years, ever. But I had a lot to say and I just quickly lost it. Had to throw it aside because what I just witnessed was a bunch of smokescreen and frankly, it's upsetting. This liability issue you guys keep harping on is, this is an advisory committee that makes no decisions. The decisions are made by the planning commissioner, the planning director, and you, the board of commissioners. We're a advisory committee of volunteers. This council is trumping up all sorts of fear to get rid of us. This is a staff-driven mission to dismiss us, and it's really upsetting because none of it's really based in fact. When I served for one term, there was 3 attorneys on this committee. There was no one meeting privately, having quorums and discussions. That is insulting. When I pick up the Daily Historian, the commissioner here talks about how we knock on people's doors to argue about hedges and tree trimming. I mean, I don't like living some alternate universe because down in Arch Cape, 30 miles south of here, which is a very long drive, it is not what's happening. This committee, well, let me back up, I'm getting a little emotional, but when I served on this committee, numerous times, and I'd have to say practically every meeting, found county staff making mistakes that we corrected, and it might have been embarrassing. It might have been frustrating for that staff member at the time, but we had to do that, and we helped the county. We consistently helped you and kept you out of hot water because these things were going to get accepted and moved right through because we understand our community. We live there, we breathe there, we love it there. The people are volunteers working to help, and we're committee members, we're county committee members. It's like this adversarial thing is just imaginary, and I really believe that. So what's happening now, since you tried to dissolve twice, and you take your council's opinion and you lost twice at LUBA, you know, something to think about, is that there's this new sentiment going on down there, and it's kind of a catch me if you can. And there's developments that are going to happen. They're not being permitted. I've personally witnessed lot clearings, road clearings, things that aren't allowed in Arch Cape. They are remodels being done. One was by a developer, realtor that supported the solution of this committee without permits. This is going to keep getting worse. And the thing is, the people that usually work with you and worked for you no longer have that desire to do that. It's going to really wreck our community. So my time is up. So what I'm asking you is that you work with us, your constituents, your community, to salvage the properly functioning and valuable aspects of the CAC. I ask that you convene a work group of the county and South Coast residents to work on how to best tailor the CAC for the future. There are great things that we have done. You don't just throw us out because you're fearful of some liability that your attorney tells you about. And I ask that you leave this record open for 14 days so we can figure this out before the next LUBA appeal. Thank you so much. Sorry for getting emotional, but I really found this upsetting. Thank you.
Is there any other citizens who would like to testify? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record, please. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Jim Jensvold, Jensvold. I live at 80030 Pacific Road in Arch Cape. And I've never been a member of this advisory committee. I'm just a citizen. I just live there. My civic participation's been pretty much limited to volunteer road cleaning and bringing potato salad to the community club dinners. But I want to say that I'm strongly in favor of maintaining some formal community citizen participation in Arch Cape and in the Southwest community. You have, because I gave it to you, and I think you got it by email, and you've seen some of it before, petition asking for the retention of the committee. There's 216 signatures and 94 comments, and I hope you've read those, or some of them anyway. Some of them are old and some of them are new, because the petition's been ongoing online for some time. Now, in it, you'll see that the people that sign these things, they're long-term residents, they're part-time residents, part-time people. There are people who own vacation rentals, and there are contractors and builders, all in there. I wanted to read one thing that's not in there. I got an email from somebody in the community. Now, if you want to corroborate this, I can try to get the person to talk to you personally. The person did not want to be named. It says, just a comment, and the county may not care that this is going on. As soon as the committee was disbanded, a neighbor in our community, and this is Arch Cape, who rents short-term, built a guest house or bunkhouse in the back to accommodate more people. They only have 2 parking spaces available on the property, and they did this. I gave partly it away. The person who wrote this said they had no permit. That's according to the person, who, by the way, is a long-term and permanent resident of Arch Cape. Says, while it was being built, the workers told us it was a storage shed It's the loveliest storage shed I've ever seen, and many people sleeping in it. So this is what's happened since we have no design review committee in Arch Cape. We want representation, we need representation. I heard it said here in these chambers that the Planning Commission is our representation. We talked about this issue with the Planning Commission, and the representatives from our area were not here. So I will conclude, and I want to agree with Mr. Manzulli that I'd like to ask the commissioners to keep the record open for a period of time, and I really think we are not, despite what was quoted in the Astorian, we're not a bunch of jackbooted thugs that go around beating on people's doors. We're reasonable people. We'd like to work with the county. We don't like being insulted either. And please come and work with us, and let's fix the problems. They're fixable. They're fixable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there anyone else who would like to testify tonight? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record. Welcome, sir.
My name is Bill Gaylord. My house in Arch Cape is at 80296 Pacific Road. My wife and I built our house there 18 years ago in the presence of the Design Review Committee without difficulty. We also own developable lots in the community. We have an interest in development there. I have never served on the committee. My wife has. I've never had an issue before the committee except very easy approval of our design in our house. I can see through my wife's experience and through my close contacts with many long-term servants on that committee that it has had value and continues to have value in that community. I've been a lawyer for 44 years. That's almost exactly the same life period that we've had statewide land use planning in Oregon. The first 4 years of my career, I was a land use lawyer. I co-edited the first lawyer's handbook on land use planning in Oregon. The next 40 years, I've been a liability lawyer. I represent people with claims against medical providers and product manufacturers and government entities. This risk analysis you've heard, I gotta say, is a problem looking for a problem. That smacks to me of an analysis done to bootstrap a decision that's already been made. It has nothing to do with reality. I don't care if one person had an ADA problem. Agencies of all kinds have ADA issues and they solve them. It is not grounds to abandon a valuable committee. The record needs to show that this committee has been, quote, it has engaged in active participation with persistent involvement for all these years of its existence and continuing up to the last time you let it exist. I make that point because this record needs to be clear about that. You have not a single piece of evidence to the contrary. You can't make a finding of fact to the contrary. A finding of fact was made by the committee with a standing room only crowd to that effect, and you can't say it's not true. And that's the record on which you go up on your next appeal after you're off the committee again. And you're going to rely on the advice that's gotten you there twice before to your peril. I think you'd be better advised to think again about what you're trying to do here and work with this committee and keep a valuable asset in the county and give the people 35 miles south of here a chance to feel like they're part of your county and have a real representation going on. The idea that you have liability there is fetched a bit, I must say. And I think it's an attempt to get you to a place that's probably going to get you to another failed appeal.
Thank you very much. Is there any response from staff?
Oh, there's no one else.
Oh, excuse me, ma'am. Come on up, state your name and address for the record.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Linda Ironman, 80296 Pacific Road, Arch Cape. I mostly want to stand on my written testimony, of which there's plenty in the record, but I want to make one point, I hope clearly on behalf of my neighbors, many of them who care deeply about this issue. What the people of the Southwest Coastal Region want is they want to retain their voice in land use matters that affect their region. You know, we want to keep our seat at the table. We want access. We want continued access to the decision makers in the county so our point of view is heard. We don't want to go from active participation and persistent involvement one day or for 40 years to just a fond memory of that committee that we used to have, remember, where people could come and share their views and sit down neighbor to neighbor, as your motto goes, and talk with other neighbors and their developers and their architects in the county. So what we are asking is that you table this ordinance and that you convene a work group where representatives of the county and people from the Southwest Coastal Region can sit down together. We can talk about tailoring the committee for the future needs of the community and the future needs of the county. We can talk about the county's concerns about cost, about time delays, about where to meet. We can talk about the community's concerns about keeping our livability, keeping our tree buffers, keeping our wetlands from development. It's really just a channel of communication. That's what we had, and that's what we want to continue to have. You know, you've dissolved us twice. We fought back, but our goal has been the same. Really, we just want to be a part of the process. That's my request, is that you table this for now, convene a work group, and let's see what happens. I also request that you leave the hearing record open for 14 days for any supplemental testimony that may come in. Thank you very much.
Have a great evening. Is there any other citizens that would like to speak? Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record.
Give it a shot. My name's Tevis Dooley. I live at 31972 East Ocean Lane in Arch Cape. I've been there off and on in Arch Cape since 1980. I'm a builder, and much as often a builder would not like to have to go through a design review of any kind, I recognize the value of it, and I've seen it work in Arch Cape as opposed to seeing just cooperation with the county outside of a more focused eye on the project, so to speak. And so from that standpoint, I value what the committee has done in Arch Cape all these years. So from that standpoint, I just hope that you seriously consider that. It sounds to me like this might be a matter of money more than anything else. The issues of liability, I think that can be blown away. But in terms of money, I don't know. If we can work together and streamline things a little bit so that your staff doesn't have to work quite so hard, then whatever it takes. But for us to lose our ability to intimately work with the county staff is an important thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment?
I have one more question of staff. Is that allowed, or is that just against the rules?
can we do the staff response, and then I'll
Sure.
allow
Heck
some
yeah, 'cause
questions for
maybe
staff?
staff will respond
May I have
to
the
that.
staff response, please?
First, I just need to point out that there's no obligation to hold the record open. The board can, of course, do whatever it likes, but there's no legal obligation to hold the record open. I'll defer to Heather to respond to the substance.
Yeah, you might have something additional. I just wanted to say that if there were any building activity requiring permits that was going on in Arch Cape, no one called us to complain about it. If we get a complaint, we respond to see if there's an actual violation, and if there's a violation, we follow through on that violation. That has nothing to do with whether the committee is in effect or not. As far as continuing to have an area that is livable and what the community wants, the development code is the appropriate place for that, to make sure that there are design regulations and whatever it may be. I mean, wetlands are protected because the code, says they need to be protected, and we're working on a wetland ordinance it's going to take a while because we don't have a lot of staff to do it, but it would come forward and adopt the local wetland inventory down there that would have local wetland protection standards. If you want to protect vegetation, that should all be in the code. And then the code should be clear and objective so that it can be applied, whether it's me approving it or the Planning Commission approving it. That's what you look to, is the code. It shouldn't be a committee making up something that isn't in the code. So if the code isn't clear, that's where you address the issues for livability. I think that was it. Did you have something else?
Yeah, I do want to follow up on that. Thank you for that segue. That's one of the things, as the land use lawyer, the land use law has developed considerably over the last 40 years, and all of the design review is a quasi-judicial decision. And the county is only allowed to apply the criteria that are in your code. The notion that people could sit around the kitchen table and decide what somebody else's development looks like scares me, because it would violate a lot of very good laws that were adopted over the last 40 years. You're only allowed to apply the criteria that are in code. You can't tell somebody you've got to turn their house this way, or you put your driveway over there, unless it's based in the code. And that's one of the serious concerns that I have about the committee. Yes, everybody makes mistakes, and sometimes committees apply criteria that aren't in the code, but when you do that consistently, then you get appealed. And we'll go to LUBA either today or to correct those errors. But that's one of the concerns I have about the committee that is based in the land use laws. It has nothing to do with the ADA or anything else. And these are, as Ms. Hanson said, the criteria are the same. None of the criteria about setbacks, about wetlands, height limits, anything else are changing. Those are all absolutely stay the same. So now I have a little more comfort that they might be applied more objectively and consistent with the law.
I did want to make a comment just quickly. There, two people who testified mentioned a newspaper article in the paper, which I didn't read, and something about jackbooted thugs. I want to make clear that none of anything in that article came from staff. I was not asked any questions. I don't know where they got that information, if it was from neighbors or what, but so I just wanted to say it didn't come from staff.
Well, thank you very much.
May I?
Does the board members, thank you for that staff report, and do any of the members of the board have questions for staff?
So I did not say jackbooted thugs.
No, somebody who testified.
I understand.
No, we're not going to do that. Please, you had your opportunity for public testimony, and we're not going to go back and forth here. Please respect and allow the commissioner to speak.
Here's what I'm telling you. When the committee worked well, it worked beautifully. There are a lot of people who are passionately devoted to neighborhood livability, and a lot of good work was done. The problem was there was some not so good work that was done. I mean, I personally received a phone call that I thought was so threatening, that promised that this was war, and was so emotionally painful. I'm still shuddering to think about it. So the idea is, how do we maintain livability? Because everybody here wants that. Everybody wants neighborhood livability. Everybody wants citizen participation, not just for the people in Arch Cape, who have done it very well, very often, but for everybody in Clatsop County to have that opportunity to maintain what's good and carry it forward, but also to take out what hasn't worked well. And people here, very calm, very reasonable, very neighborly. I've had people report to me who are too intimidated to come forward to speak. And I understand, having been subjected to some of that myself, what constrains them. It's very uncomfortable. It's personally very uncomfortable, and it's done under the name and the auspices of protecting Arch Cape Design Review Committee. So there are some things that have gone awry. How do we maintain what is good? When I look in the revised ordinance, I see opportunity to continue to do good. I don't want to lose anything. I don't want to see it go away. I'm assuming that when you wrote this, your intent was that staff would be responsive to neighbors' concerns wherever they arose in Clatsop County. Was that your intention?
Yes, especially the addition of requiring an applicant neighborhood meeting for certain applications so that they could hear what the neighbors' concerns were before they submit their application. But that doesn't apply to building a house. If you have a single-family residential zone and a lot that's zoned residential, you're intended to build a house, so they come in for building permits. There's no review of that.
And I've sat on this county board of commissioners and listened to neighbors tell other applicants, you don't need a garage, you don't need a deck, you don't need a McMansion-sized house. That's on a public record. And so this was, what did you call it? Additional non-legal criteria? Is that a fair way to characterize it? That's really an abuse of power. Now, some of that went on, and I don't think people were trying to be bad people. They thought they were protecting neighborhood livability, but they went over and above what they were legally allowed to do, and they went over and above what emotionally they would do as a good neighbor. And that has been reported to me enough times that I think it's a real problem. So I understand that the people who are here tonight maybe don't see that, maybe don't agree with that. But people have come to me and have said that. So, and having experienced it myself, I give credence to it. If people don't like what happens with staff, they have opportunity to come in neighborhood meetings. They still can come to the County Board of Commissioners.
In the Planning Commission. Oh, you mean if there are issues?
There's recourse, right,
Yes.
still?
Planning Commission.
The Planning Commission, I mean, all of the protections that were there, I mean, because the concern is clear. The county staff won't listen to us. We want to protect our neighborhood, and we're afraid the county staff won't listen to us. If people have that concern, in your mind, have you remedied?
Yes, but to be clear, Commissioner, not for building a house or a shed. So if someone is going to build a house or a shed, the criteria in the code really guide that, what the setback is or the height limit. So if the code isn't adequate, then people should be commenting on what amendments we should make to the code in addition to what's being proposed. So there will not be an opportunity to weigh in on the color of someone's house or where the house is on the site. What will guide that is meeting the setbacks and avoiding the wetland or height limits, et cetera.
In other words, the legal requirements, not additional criteria that people want to impose because it's their personal value.
Right, and that's how it's carried out elsewhere in the county. So, but each zoning district has, slight variations on what is allowed or required when they're developing a house. So some of the requirements in Arch Cape are more stringent than they are elsewhere, as it is now. But they could also be amended further.
They could be amended further, but I'll tell you, neighborhood livability, as I was driving out to this meeting tonight, here's my next door neighbor burning garbage again, stinking up the neighborhood. Sometimes it's hard to be a good neighbor. Just
Thank you,
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner. Do any of the other commissioners have questions for staff?
I
or
have
comments?
a comment. I live in Gearhart, and you probably read in the paper that Gearhart has a lot of controversy. And one of the reasons is because there's a great deal of citizen involvement. Now, it's true, we're an incorporated city. But a lot of the same things apply, even though Arch Cape is not incorporated to have your own city. If there is something that is built, now, this person that wrote and said this illegal structure was built in someone's land, unless people complain about it, nobody's going to know, even in Gearhart. That same thing applies. So it's a shame that people are mistaken in thinking if design review, your committee, disbands that, oh, it's just a free-for-all, they can do whatever they want. That's lack of information and education. And this is where you as neighbors and citizens can form together your groups to educate people, to help them understand what the codes are. And you have the right for enforcement of these violations. Whether you, it all depends on how involved you are. And this is what I see in Gearhart. Citizens are very involved. Sometimes it's not very pleasant because they're so involved, but they care, and it all comes back to, and I hear objections all the time in town hall meetings, well, we don't like this and we don't like that, but it all comes back to what the ordinances are, what the building codes are. You can't just arbitrarily say, well, we don't like that. You can say it, but you can't enforce it. So it comes back to what the law says. So in that way, it's similar.
Thank you. Is there any more questions or comments?
I would.
I'm going to.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
I will close the public hearing. Yeah. And I'm going to I would like to entertain a motion to adopt ordinance 17-02 and declare an emergency and conduct the second reading by title only.
I move to adopt ordinance 17-02, adopting legislative text amendments to the comprehensive plan and land and water development, and use ordinance 80-14 to declare an emergency and to conduct the second reading by title only.
Looking for a second. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion, second. I'm going to pull this out and make sure I get it right. We have a motion, second, to adopt ordinance 17-02, adopting legislative text amendments to the comprehensive plan and land and water development, and use ordinance 80-04 to declare an emergency and to conduct the second reading by title only. Is there any further deliberations? Seeing no further deliberations, I'll call for a roll call vote. Clerk?
Commissioner Nevertheless?
Aye.
Commissioner Clement? Aye. Commissioner Lee?
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan?
No.
Commissioner Thompson?
This is why they pay us the big bucks. Neighbors, I'm sorry I can't agree with what you want me to do. Aye.
Unanimous anyway.
The motion fails. I will continue the public hearing to May 24th. Thank you, everybody. Now we move on to commissioners' reports. Commissioner Thompson.
Well, I understand neighbors' frustration with trying to have county responsiveness, because I wanted to have an executive session to discuss the county manager's evaluation. But by charter, the chair of the County Board of Commissioners sets the agenda. And he wants 3 votes before doing that. So I'm going to move that we have an executive session to discuss the county manager's evaluation before we complete the county manager's evaluation. So I make that motion. Could I have a second, please?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to plan for an executive session to conduct a conversation concerning the county manager,
Discussion?
a discussion concerning the county manager before the evaluations are completed on
I
May.
would like to have a discussion about the motion.
In executive session?
No, now, about the motion. I would like to have a discussion about the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and
Before the vote.
yeah, we're going to have deliberation. I was just reciting the motion.
Sorry.
So we have a motion and a second to move into an executive session to discuss the county manager. Before we move it to a vote, is there any deliberations, please?
Yes. Have we done this in the past?
Not to my knowledge.
Other jurisdictions do this. This is common practice. This is common practice in personnel matters for the members of the governing body to have an executive session. Now, county manager can move it into public session should he or she wish, but in order to have some freedom and to have we have 2 important things we do. One is the budget, the other is the evaluation of the county manager's performance. And I think it's fair that we have a considered discussion before we proceed with the county manager's evaluation. I think it's fair for him. I think it's better for us. I think it makes a stronger board, and I think it makes a stronger organization.
Can I say one thing before, if it's okay,
Yeah,
your pleasure?
yeah.
I agree, but the point is this, is that I feel that we should, that each individual commissioner should complete their individual evaluation, and then we can move to a broader discussion in an executive session or not. It seems like this motion is putting the cart before the horse. How can we continue a discussion of the county manager when the first step has not been completed? Finishing the evaluations by the deadline is not the completion of the evaluation, it's the completion of the evaluations.
Chair Lee, maybe I can help here. Commissioner Thompson's correct. These things are routinely discussed in executive session, but you can't call an executive session with less than 24 hours notice. It has to be published.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it can't happen tonight.
Can't happen, okay, I thought the notion was that it would happen tonight.
Oh, no.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Your motion was to call for an executive session in the future.
Yeah, in the future, no,
Well,
because I
okay.
understand, no, it has to be properly noticed, and he has the option of saying he wants it to be a public session, I mean,
Yeah, and I
so-
completely understand that, and I said in an email, I think, to you, and only you, is that I think that we should it serves no purpose in my mind to have the executive session before the individual evaluations are completed, so this gives us an opportunity to allow the HR director to compile more information that would inform the executive session.
Okay, so I understand, just hang on.
Okay.
Well, Kathleen, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
My concern, and maybe this is that I'm not understanding the process, but my concern is that we sit together as a board and discuss the evaluation. So if what the protocol is that we complete our evaluations first, will we then have a discussion?
Well, absolutely.
And will that then be in an executive session?
Well, that's up to the county manager.
So, because it wasn't clear to me if we were going to have a discussion or not, because it sounded to me that we were just going to complete the evaluations and then they would be tabulated and then that would be it. So my main concern is that we talk together as a body when we have the evaluation. If that's what's going to happen, then I'm fine with that.
Well, apparently there's been some miscommunication, and perhaps that's my fault.
Well,
okay?
so let me just say, though.
If I can, okay, and let me finish.
All right.
So I hear you loud and clear, and I'm sorry that wasn't articulated clearly to you, and that may have been my fault. But the point is that I want to get these written evaluations completed so the HR director can compile them, and then we can have the discussion.
That's
That
fine
is
with me.
simply where I've been all along on this, and I apologize for not being clearer to you, but I didn't kind of communicate that to you, but I did communicate it to Commissioner Thompson. And so my apologies also to you if you felt that the evaluation is going to, the written evaluation is going to be the end of this process.
Well,
Because that was not my intention.
Okay, I got that. But here's the thing. I want to see a different evaluation than the one you have presented. And that's what I want to talk about. That's why I want all of us to talk about it so that everybody can be on the same page when we say, what is it that we are evaluating? Because in my mind, we haven't come to good agreement on that.
Fair enough. And I would say that after we conduct this exercise, we can talk about that in either an executive or a public session, and that I would be more than happy, Commissioner Thompson, to work with you to put together or have a discussion and to bring something to the board for future county management evaluations, that we can have a discussion to find out something that would be more suited to and more amenable to you. That being said, I recognize the fact that you were unsatisfied with the county evaluations over the last few years. This is a new one. This iteration is a new one in an attempt to satisfy those needs, but apparently I and the folks that put this together, we still need it, and I respect and acknowledge that. So I would like to work together with you to work.
I appreciate that.
But as far as this process here for this current evaluation, the ball is already rolling. Now, we can talk about that in the evaluation, and if you want to bring up some other issues, but in an executive session or in a public session, and that's of the purview of the county manager.
I have a comment.
Please.
So we did go down this road before because there were some aspects of the prior evaluation forms where we had to evaluate the county manager on how they interacted with the public, and that was a problem. And then there were some other circumstances that came about with the former county manager, and so we did a 360 evaluation. It didn't show anything different.
I think you were here for that one.
And we spent $30-some thousand on this, and it didn't come up with anything different than we had already done or evaluated. So if that's the road that we're talking about going down, I don't want to do that.
I'm not looking.
Neither do I, because it's expensive.
It's very
And we did a
expensive.
360 overview, and yeah, I'm sorry.
Well,
I
no.
don't mean to interrupt.
360-degree overview doesn't have to cost $30,000. There are other ways of doing it that are effective. I'm happy to work with you.
I look forward to you and I sitting down and penciling that out.
That's good.
Fair enough?
That's good. Well,
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Is there any further deliberations?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't really understand. Okay, so there was no timeline put on this motion as far as when would this take place? This would be after the evaluation? Because I'm already in the process of doing that. So I don't know what the I don't know what the value of that is after that's already done, unless we're looking towards the next year. So I don't quite understand the timeline on this.
Neither do I. The evaluations, we've postponed twice now. And since we're there, this is part of my commissioner's report. The second date for evaluations to be returned to me, personally, and then I will forward them anonymously to the HR director, is May 15th, which I think is next Monday. And then yeah, and so then basically if your motion passes, then, my plan was we can have an executive session at the May 24th meeting and a discussion of the evaluation. But that basically, like I said, whether County Manager Moore can choose to have that in a public session.
So let me just understand this. We are going to proceed with the evaluation as it is constructed now. We will do nothing further to seek input from other county partners as part of this.
County partners, what do you mean by county partners?
Well, I said this in an email before. We've got some auxiliary bodies that are part of our purview, and we have some other elected officials. I think it's a good practice. I think it would also be a good, to include their input. I think it would also be a good practice to include the input from staff. I mean, what happened before is that things started to go wrong, and we, as the governing body, didn't have any mechanism for including that information.
It was more than that.
Okay.
So if I may make a point. So Leanne, it sounds to me, I'm sorry, Chairman Thompson. I mean, not Chairman Thompson. This person over here. So the motion that I seconded was to have an executive session before the evaluation is done. It sounds to me like the commission is not on board with that, but we will have a discussion after the evaluations are complete, and you have agreed to work with Chairman Lee on changing the evaluation for next time. Is that correct?
Is that what you said?
Well, that was kind of my thought. And listen, if we'll have this evaluation is ongoing, when we have the conversation, and we'll speak as a board, and then it's really up to the county manager whether we go into executive session or not.
Heck yeah.
I wasn't denying the fact that we couldn't have an executive session, and this is where I apologize, because there's some messaging mistakes here, and I think that you know, the evaluation wasn't ending when I had the deadline for the evaluation documents to be submitted to me, to be tallied, and then to deliberate.
So
if we deliberate as a body, then it seems to me, I don't know if council, then it would be under the auspices of the county manager to decide whether he wants to have an executive session.
The evaluation itself, that's correct. You can have discussions about forms all you want.
So I think that we have simply a procedural issue, and I would recommend that you withdraw your motion.
Well, it's been seconded, so we have to vote on it.
No, we can both, if we both agree, we can withdraw it.
Okay.
Do you both agree to withdraw your motion?
Sure, but you better work with me.
Okay, I'll withdraw my second.
Okay, thank you. And again, I think that there was a miscommunication on my part, and I apologize to Commissioner Thompson for that, and also to Commissioner Sullivan for kind of getting cross on our communication, because that's one of the things, if I may say, it was really important that when Commissioner Thompson made that request to me, and that when you reply to Commissioner's request, and I know this is part of the Hanby decision and the legislature's trying to find a fix and on and on and on, but I want to err on the side of caution.
Here's
So
the
it's
thing.
very important,
Okay.
let me finish, is that when commissioners don't respond to all the other commissioners, and we've reiterated that before, and I just wanted to say that again. And so that may have actually been the source of some of the miscommunication.
Here's the thing that really troubles me. We, in my mind, do not have enough deliberation as a body. Things get on a train and they go 90 miles an hour. Things are done. Nope, you've already decided that. Your opportunity for input is passed. No, this happens repeatedly.
Well,
and getting items
point
on the
taken.
agenda, 2.5-year exercise in frustration.
Well, I
So-
don't understand, well, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'll,
Yeah, so we'll talk some more about that, but I'm telling you, I think there needs to be a clear mechanism for commissioners to be able to add items to the agenda in a way that is easy, that promotes a further discussion and integrates what we're doing and what we care about with the work of the whole Board of
I
Commissioners.
couldn't agree with you more, and I've never denied, I've never had a commissioner, or I've denied a commissioner that I know of as an agenda item, except specifically this item of what we're talking about, the executive session, and I stated my reasons for that in our first interaction. So, thank you for the conversation. Is that your report, Commissioner Thompson?
Well, I actually have more, but
Okay, thank you.
housing. Want to build affordable housing in Clatsop County. Had a couple of meetings, one on Friday, one on Monday. I'm very disappointed to miss the meeting that is about housing that was scheduled when I'm not available. I think that's a bad idea. I'll be working on this. I would hope that commissioners' work is both respected and integrated into the work of not only the County Board of Commissioners, but all of county operations.
Thank you for that report. Commissioner Sullivan.
I understand that emotions are running high in this meeting today, but I can, that's all that I'll say about that. But, so I guess I talked to Cam before the meeting, and he tells me, and maybe he can elaborate this more on his report, that finally the recycling situation is going to get taken care of for Arch Cape. I'm not Arch Cape, for my District 4, because I've gotten a lot of information or contact from constituents talking about garbage and being dumped in forests and things being burned, and they really want this. So I'm really happy to hear that that's going to be resolved. And I hope to, in the future, to work with Cam and Michael Summers, maybe to get some contact with the constituents down out in Westport, talk about the new Westport plan that's out there, some other issues, just so that we have some contact with them. And I'll be going to County College next week. And also there's the, don't forget the elected officials meeting that's happening next week too. So with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Nebeker.
Okay, I attended the Public Safety Coordinating Council, but there was no quorum, so there were no decisions made, but we had a lively discussion about setting goals. Then I attended the Gearhart Town Hall meeting. Those are always, talk about emotional. You should come there sometime. You live there, County Manager.
And I avoid those.
Yeah. Well, this was about moving the fire hall police station, or fire station police station, moving it to higher ground, which is absolutely necessary, but they want to put it on the public park, and people are very upset about that. And they're talking about, who knows when this event is going to occur. Maybe it won't even occur for 100 years. Why would we do this? So there were all kinds of opinions, but it was very well researched. There was a committee that has been on this, looking at this for 2 years. Tom Horning was there. Lots of good information. They've been very thorough, and I would like to know more. I heard, and I don't remember where I heard this, but is there going to be funding cuts to rural fire districts? Did I hear that from you, Cam?
I haven't, but I mean, the fire districts are independent from the county, so.
Fire people. Separate budgets.
The fire people? No.
The emergency people.
Okay, I
think there's some
report. They said there was always.
Okay. I wonder how can I get more information about that?
The rural firefighting districts?
Yes.
Severity, right?
Because I have an idea about a compromise in Gearhart for because there already is a rural fire station and it's higher ground, but nobody brought that up, and I just wondered if there could be some kind of partnering. Thank you. Wow, good memory. Okay, so that's what I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Clement.
There was a great 10K run at Fort Clatsop. There was over 60 people that came and ran it, and there was an entrance fee. I can't remember how much it was, but every penny was used to maintain the trails. So I think everyone was super happy to pay that. It was a great time. I received a detailed update from an ODFW board member last week. I was caught up on the current happenings and how they affect our community. The Gillnet ban seems to be on hold. Very little talked about it. not enforced to date. There's nothing on the near future agendas regarding this topic. They're talking about the wolves right now. So, the Youngs Bay fishery has been open since mid-April. We get about 4-hour season, which is very little considering it takes 45 minutes to lay out the net and 45 minutes to pick up the net. So the net sits for maybe about 2 hours. The net is really small. So the fish caught have been little. I've yet to been able to purchase one. So there's not very many. 845 fish were caught. There were 348 deliveries. And that means that each fisherman has caught in 1 month approximately 2.436 fish. I report.
Thank you. I will be, excuse me?
May I add something while I'm thinking of it?
Sure.
Did anybody here on the commission get something from Tessa Crawford about seeking your feedback on Oregon's coastal and oceans resilience? Did you get that? It's a student survey, because I would like to forward it to you, because this is not my area of expertise. I know that Chairman Lee and Chairman Clement.
I don't think I got that.
Okay.
I think I did get that, but please forward it to me anyways, because I was going to speak to that in
Okay,
a second.
all right. Thank you, I will. I'll forward it. If it's okay, can I forward it to everybody?
That's not how it works. Forward it to Cam and say, please forward to the board. That's how it works.
I just thought maybe if I ask everybody in public, then it would be okay, but.
Well, no.
We're not deliberating toward a decision, and that's what Handy is about.
I will forward it to Cam, and Cam, if you could forward it to everybody else.
I would be happy to do that.
Thank you for suffering with me on that, Commissioner Thompson. I know I'm a stickler for that one, but I think it's in the best interest of the board and the county manager.
You know, it's a personal request. I'll do my best to honor it, but it just isn't law.
Okay. I'm not going to bicker with you about that because I had a response, but we'll talk about that later.
We'll talk.
Since I lost my train of thought, I'm going to focus first on, I wanted to elaborate a little bit on, I will be giving a report to the board and staff and a public, about the GillNet update. And I appreciate the information that you've shared with me, and I'll be speaking to that issue at the Oregon Coastal Zone Management Association's meeting on May 22nd in Salem. And I will also be forward to the board some of the bills that we've tracked, some of the bills that have fallen by the wayside, and some of the ones that the Oregon Coastal Zone Management Association feels are of importance. If you have a personal opinion or concern concerning any of the boards that bills that the association supports, or if you disagree, please contact with me. It's important that that I have a good understanding of the policy points of individual commissioners. CREST. CREST has conducted its audit, and no significant deficiencies or findings were found. It's been one of the, I've worked really hard as chair of CREST over the last 3 or 4 years, I think 4, to really have a transparent and open budget process, and also to make sure the document is of a top quality. And my opinion is that it is, and there was no findings or deficiencies. One opportunity to really learn a lot about what CREST does, and CREST has a lot of projects going on from here all the way to Sauvie Island and into Portland. A lot of BPA money is spent in mitigation. We've been working on opening up some habitat on Sauvie Island by breaching dikes and creating the super important nursery habitat in the lower estuary for smolts as they make their way to the ocean. One of the great ways folks can really get a feel for how their electricity dollars through BPA are being spent in enhancement because of the Marshall Act. On the north side, if you go over the bridge, you'll see the Dismal Niche, and you might have noticed that they have a giant box culvert they put on a small salmon-bearing stream, where it allowed fish to not have to jump into a little culvert and swim 20 feet under the road and pop out. And some can. Cutthroat and coho are able to navigate that, but other animals that aren't as athletic, or no, that's not the word.
Agile.
Acrobatic, to be able to jump into that and go through there. Well, if you get some free time, go to see what the box culvert, because the box culvert that we put there in Megler really shows how we're reconnecting these small tributaries to the main stem, and it's really amazing. And I can tell you, at two of the sites, one at Dismal Niche, right across the bridge just before the rest stop, and the other one down towards Chinook County City Park, where these culverts have been put in, it's almost that the animals, the smolts almost are instantly finding these niches. And a lot of the smolts, as they make their way to the ocean, are using the North Channel, which is very curious to some biologists. The North Channel seems to be a favored channel, which is a smaller channel, but historically, 100 years ago, it was the main channel, or 150 or more. So anyways, going to Dismal Niche is a great way to see, excuse me, this good work that Crest does in action. And you can see the tide goes in and out. The next one they're going to do is a few miles to the east at that where that sunken ship is. Oh, yeah. And the barge. That's another little culvert. And you know, these streams in the summer can only be a couple feet wide, but they are amazing, the amount of fish that utilizes them. Sea wren, cutthroat, coho mostly. It's fascinating. Fish is one of my things. Northwest Oregon Housing Authority. And excuse me, we had our strategic planning, and as a board, you know, we yearly sit down and talk about, you know, where do we want to go and how do we want to get there, and what are we going to do, and what difference is it going to make? And I guess one of the takeaways briefly about the strategic planning session is that it's been, you know, we've had the conversation where over the years, you know, NOAA has inherited or been given or in some ways ended up with properties that were, for example, the Uniontown building, which is a wonderful building that we want to bring into some affordable housing. But one of the challenges that we've encountered is that to bring these buildings up to federal standards is really, really expensive. And the board is our direction that we think we need to go is that we want to get away from rehab because it's just not productive. I understand the arguments where you have this beautiful old building that needs millions of dollars of work, but to bring it up to the federal standards, for an example, and I'm just going to throw these numbers out, and they're not relevant to any of the projects, but for a private person to come along and bring an old building up to standard cost maybe $1 million. But if you want to do it to a NOAA standard and the federal standard to get the federal funding that will allow Section 8, to get the type of loans, we have to bring it up to a higher level that costs a lot more money. So the idea is that we want to build new structures and work towards that direction. And that's a heavier lift too. Now that's not to say if we see we can cherry pick some great opportunity. And in my opinion, maybe the Uniontown fits that bill, but it's been problematic for the Housing Authority over the years to inherit these properties that nobody else wants, and then expecting that we can work some kind of miracle and bring these online for housing is a huge lift. And it was a long conversation in the strategic planning meeting, and I think the direction to go is as we build capacity in a healthy organization and working in Tillamook and Columbia County to take on properties that are up to standard and manage those. The other thing that we're talking about is in our strategic planning is as NOAA builds more capacity, and with the merger, you know, brings our capacity up even higher, we're getting to the threshold where the Housing Authority will have the ability to basically start managing its own properties. And this is really important. We feel that instead of paying a for-profit management organization that, in all honesty, the board has never been satisfied. We've had to fire them in the past. We feel that it doesn't fit to the mission of the authority and the best use of, you know, public trust. is to allow these for-profit corporations to manage our properties. And so we're trying to find ways and to build capacity to get up to the level where we can in-house management. That's another strategic goal of the Housing Authority. And finally, the conversation we had, and this is all near and dear to this board, is the conversation and the continuing contract of CCHA and the merger. And unfortunately, due to a similar situation with my calendar, I missed the CCHA meeting last 2 weeks ago, and I apologize for that. But I think that in the report that Executive Director Johnson gave, and what we're, and I've said this a year ago, that we're close to bringing a product that we can pretty much, and I think Todd talked about that at the last meeting. So that's where we're going on, kind of a little slight overview of NOAA. And finally, if you could get those evaluations to me by May 15th, then we can begin to take the next step. And that's my report. County Manager Moore.
Actually, just one item I wanted to give an update on, sticking on the topic of housing. As you know, every year we acquire property for tax foreclosure. Last year, in 2016, we did acquire one property in the Alderbrook neighborhood in Astoria that actually we thought had some potential. We have been working with the community action team on that property. They are in fact interested in acquiring that property from the county. What I am hoping to do at this point would be to be bringing something to you in June to basically consummate, if you will, that sale of property to them. So I think it was actually a good thought. I think Commissioner Sullivan actually maybe originally came up with it and said, this one might have some value to somebody. And so we appreciate the work that we've done with the CAT team. Up to this point, they haven't completely planned what they would do with the property. They have some initial things they know they have to do to the property. But so anyway, that should be coming at you in June. So please be prepared for that.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
The recycling, you said that by the end of this month, you think?
By the end of May, you know, again, the date I was given was May 19th, but those things don't always happen exactly on schedule, so I would say by the end of the month.
Thank you. Oh, one other thing that I heard is the Elliott Forest is going to be kept in public hands. So that's a great victory for the people of Oregon and anyone who visits Oregon.
Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.